So hi everyone, it's me, Sapphira, the creator of World Burlesque Day, and I'm really honored to be here today to discuss an important topic, one that's dear to my heart, which is about how to make our burlesque community healthy and heal some of these wounds. And we have the amazing Dr. Anne-Marie Quigg, who is in fact the author of a wonderful book, a couple of books, Bullying in the Arts and also Workplace Bullying. How are you, Dr. Quigg?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real privilege to be here.
Well, it's a privilege to have you and your time, because this book has honestly been a real eye-opener for me. And I found the insight and the way it's formulated things into logical diagrams, text. It just made it easier to understand these experiences for me and realize where they're happening and why. And so I was interested what prompted you to explore this topic.
Well, I think like many people who find themselves interested in some form of abuse or another, whether it's domestic abuse or bullying, there's usually a personal experience at the root of it. And that was the case with me. But during my working life, I then went on to work as a consultant, and I find myself in many different organizations, and I noticed the behavior, how it differed from place to place, but I could sense there was some kind of connection. And I decided the best way for me to find out more and fulfill my curiosity was to go and do some really in-depth research on the subject.
Right, wow. It's excellent research and it's so thorough. I think that also gives a sense of reassurance that it's not, just a thin argument. There's some very, very strong statistics and a huge amount of work's gone in. Was it difficult preparing yourself for asking people about these questions? Obviously, you've had maybe experiences, so knowing you're going to ask people to relive them is difficult for you as the interviewer and difficult for the interviewee. How did you prepare yourself for that?
Well, I think there were two sides to it. The first was I had a very good friend who was a social worker, and she specialized in counseling and interviewing young people who'd been abused. And she taught me a number of techniques that helped me move the interviews along in a way that was okay for the people who were telling me their story. There's always the opportunity to hurt someone unintentionally by asking the wrong question or asking a question in the wrong way. So I learned the techniques of how to do that. And that was particularly useful in all the case studies, the face-to-face interviews that I did. I also had to teach myself how to research because although I had an earlier degree and a diploma, it didn't come easy to me at PhD level. It's very intensive. And so I did a lot of studying of bullying research in other fields. The earliest research was in places like prisons and the armed forces and the police force, where you'd expect there to be a fair amount of aggressive behavior. And in fact, most studies show that 1 in 3 people in those environments experience bullying. But when I came to do the Earth's research, what took me by surprise was that my final statistics of the number who were being bullied was 2 in 5, which is 40%, not 33%.
Wow.
And that was a bit of a shock for me, frankly.
Yes, definitely. Well, it's interesting you came to this topic from your own experience, because I got asked to write my book about why I love burlesque, and it's really why I started World Burlesque Day, because it's been so healing. But actually, it was difficult writing about some of the bullying I'd experienced. And as I began as a student, this book, Burlesque or Bust, was easy at the start. I talked about the fun and the real awakening into sensuality. But then I got more established and started trying to put shows on or earn money to put classes together. It got more competitive, and I understood from looking at your diagrams, I wasn't a victim, I was more a target. I was glad that I could make that distinction. And I was in a situation of a pair bullying where there was 3 of us and 2 people had differing ideas, and then it just got, really a bit more heated. And it was really helpful to understand these things and see different case studies across different arts organizations. So it made me feel hope that it's not just specific to burlesque. And then I was interested too in, if you think now we've got this wonderful invention of social media, is it making bullying issues easier for people because they can be anonymous and mention what's happening safely. So is it reducing bullying, or do we see a flip side where there's more of it because also there's cyberbullying and anonymous ways people control and do all sorts of things? So do you think it's helping, or do you think it's hindering, or is it a bit of both?
Well, I think it is a bit of both, actually, because social media, when you think about it, is only a tool, like any tool, and it's effective depending on how you're using it and what for. So cyberbullying has now joined the list of things that are regarded as bullying, harassment, discrimination, racism, and therefore it's become a tool for people to abuse other people. But it's also a tool for those people who have encountered bullying, if you like, on the wrong side, who have been targets or who've witnessed friends being targets or colleagues. And for them, social media can offer really useful support. There are support groups across a number of different platforms, and people from all over the world can share experiences and help each other. So social media in itself isn't like an evil thing. Some people think it is, I know, but actually it's how it's used that makes a difference.
Yeah, that's a very good insight. So I wanted to mostly focus on solutions, which you do brilliantly. And I think there are some really incredible steps forward we can make. I'm already discovering them in other cabaret communities around the world, and I thought that was excellent. So my idea was, have you seen instances where training is implemented very effectively? And would you say that those instances then lead to much healthier organizations where bullying doesn't really exist because it's coming from the top down and it's very rigorously adhered to and implemented to show people what it is, what it looks like? Is training effectively one of the best solutions that you've seen?
I think it is one of the best solutions. And it's interesting that you mentioned implementation, because that to me is the important thing. I mean, you can have brilliant policies, but if nobody knows about them, if they're in a nice book on a shelf, or they're never referred to and never implemented, then they're not much use at all, really. Yeah. And it's the same with training. You do need, I think, to train a whole organization, not just, you don't decide, well, I'm a trustee, all the staff can get trained, but I'll be fine. It is something that everybody has to share and understand together. Right. And Equity, the Actors Union in the UK, has done this. Yeah. They gave all their staff the same day off, and they all gathered together and were trained in how to deal with complaints of bullying from actors, from dancers, whatever, and what steps they should take and how to support that person. And I think that's made a tremendous difference for them. Yeah. And there are a number of arts organisations who've taken the same steps. It's much more common now. For instance, originally we would have had disciplinary and grievance procedures. And that's all very well, if you need to punish someone for something that they've done that doesn't adhere to your code of conduct. But now we're beginning to see dignity at work and respect at work policies, which outlines not just things that you can do wrong, but what you can do that's right. And how you should respect other people. And that definitely makes a big, big difference. I read an article the other day in The Stage, which I think you might have read actually, about a producer who was accused by a lot of former employees of bullying. And one of them said something very interesting. She said she didn't feel she could complain while she was there because she knew her job would be at stake. And that would mean her livelihood. But when she finally moved on, and she spent about 18 months in another workplace, and I gather, if this is allowed, it was Netflix. She said the amount of respect and support among her colleagues was like she'd never experienced before. And that's when she felt able, a bit like domestic abuse victims, to come forward and talk about her experiences. So it can be very effective if you create an environment in the workplace that's friendly and supportive and not toxic.
Yes, absolutely. And artists are naturally passionate. Also in sometimes high stress environments, because events and backstage, a lot of unpredictable things happen. And I've always tried to have like a couple of values, words like compassion, forgiveness, really holding a space in case anyone has a meltdown, which I don't think is in the bullying category, but understandably, if you're crossing heel falls off your high heels right when you're about to perform or in the middle of your show, you know, you're going to burst into tears and strong emotions can be present. But I thought your piece about actually describing quickly what bullying is in the introduction we always have at my shows, I thought it wouldn't hurt to just mention we don't tolerate bullying. It might look like this, it might look like that. If anyone notices it, please report it to me. We really want to make sure this adheres to the values, and that's definitely one. And I think that could even be an extra step. And the audience also can be educated by the MC saying, these shows are here to provoke and shock you. You'll see different parts of, you know, nudity and semi-nudity. And if there's things that are a bit, you know, confronting, we just want you to just sit with that and see how that feels for you. Try not to make a judgment on it, and see where we are by the end of the show. And that way we're kind of paving a nice way for the audience too. So the audience can sometimes be in a bit of a shock mode, and that can create strong reactions. So I just suddenly started to realize all these different ways, even what I'm doing in a very humble, like small capacity, could be a lot more effective. And I think that that is an excellent point, that when there's that natural culture, it tends to eliminate it in itself anyway. It's probably not even attracting those types of personalities, hopefully, but that's very useful. So if you had to rank, you know, training, a HR team, a union, policies, or mediation in terms of effectiveness as solutions, what would you sort of do from 1 to 5, 1 being the most high priority to 5 being the lowest?
Well, I think I can start with 5, because in my experience and experiences that have been shared with me, human resources departments are not necessarily the best port of call if you had a bullying experience in the workplace. And that's because, unlike, for example, trade unions, they're not there to support individual workers. The department exists to implement management's policy. And that means if a complaint of bullying is going to cause an upset, especially among management, then HR departments have been known to just quash any complaint, not follow it through, or even in some cases ensure that the people who've made the complaint are moved on, so that they don't kind of mess up their cozy little existence. So I would put, that's number 5. That's easy.
5, rule that one out.
I have to say mediation would be my number 4, and I think that's a pity. It is my number 4, because I don't think all bullying circumstances are appropriate for mediation.
Right.
You know, mediation means that the two people, the alleged perpetrator and the target, have to agree to sit down and talk together, usually with a stranger. And when someone's been accused of bullying, their very first reaction tends to be denial, and then a counterclaim of bullying. So mediation is fine in a workplace where there's already a degree of understanding, excuse me, and acceptance on the part of the allegations, the person who's against whom the allegations are made. But it's not suitable when there's an imbalance of power. And that is generally the case. Very often you will find in an organization, a boss or a manager is accused of bullying a subordinate by the subordinate. So you're not starting from what they call a level playing ground in the first place.
No.
The other 3, I think training is very useful. I would put that at my number 2, and policies for my number 3, because you don't have to have one in order to have the other. In other words, you can have a good code of conduct understood in a workplace and train people, and that's more effective than just having a policy that doesn't get implemented.
Yes.
But I would have to put trade unions at the top because of their support for so many people in so many different organizations. And I've seen that here in the UK. There's one group that I've talked with several times, and it's called the Federation of Entertainment Unions, and it includes equity, and Musicians Union, the Writers Guild, who do screenwriting and films, film producers, and the National Union of Journalists. So I've done a number of events and presentations for that group. And I know I'm reaching all these different artists in lots of different workplaces, and so are they. And that's the benefit, I think, of having support from the union, in this country anyway.
Yes, definitely. And there are varying degrees of that around the world. But I think really training is sounding like such an obvious one that I think you're right, could be easily implemented just on an A4 piece of paper or on a page on a website, and mentioned when any teacher joins a school, when any student comes on their first class, at the beginning of any show, you know, in the rehearsal sort of circle as things get handed out and you get shown where, you know, your coats get hung and your refreshments are. Like, all these things could be just, it doesn't have to be arduous, could just be a 5-minute acknowledgement verbally of it, and a bit of time then people can read materials. But I think we just don't, I've never seen that happen. I've done like a welcome circle and talked about values and positivity. That is really interesting to think about ways to implement training for addressing what bullying is in simple ways, which we can do at burlesque shows and events and dance schools. The final thing I wanted to really ask was, you mentioned in your book arts are already in competition for funding and already in competition for staff. And we have seen a rise in talent quests in the arts field, which I wonder, having just one winner or some grand crown and monetary prize, it puts people in a rivalry. And do you think that might inspire some bullying behavior, competitions existing in an art form?
Well, it's a difficult one. I don't like competitions of any sort. And I think even in our schools, there can be very many issues as a result of pupils being awarded, for instance, for attendance, which I think is ridiculous, given that if you're ill, you shouldn't be in school anyway. But I think, yes, and of course, the art is a curious mixture of things that we do together and things that we do separately. You think of visual arts, you know, a painter tends to work alone, for example. But in an orchestra or in a theatre company, everybody's participating together. So if you try and instill, you know, extra competition into what is already tough business, it's bound to create problems. It's an interesting point that when I wrote my second book, which was the handbook of dealing with workplace bullying, and a lot of the people who contributed came from different parts of the world, and particularly the young man I remember who wrote the chapter about USA, who worked in the Department of Labour, and he was a great fan of the arts, but he said competition there was fierce, absolutely fierce. And I imagine that must be the case in any field where you're encouraged to compete, because it does mean that it's hard for you to be glad for your fellow artists if the result of them winning means that you don't. I think that's only human nature, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And in closing, would you have any advice for the burlesque world? We're gathering more momentum on World Burlesque Day and finding far-flung corners that have this glorious art form, up to even 55 countries now. As we tackle this issue and try and find productive solutions, what would be a piece of advice you might have for us?
Well, I think, like all performers, and especially from some of the things you said earlier, most performers invest a lot of themselves in their art form. It's their kind of chosen career, as it were, and it's very easy to start to find you're doing very well and to forget about really the compassionate and human and kind side of yourself. And I'm sure this must be true in burlesque as much as it is in the theatre. And so I would say, look after each other, make the most of your community in terms of support. Maybe one day we'll have a burlesque union, which is worldwide. That would be something, wouldn't it?
Definitely. Well, I really appreciate your time, and we'll be posting links to the books in our posts and social media. Thank you so much, Dr. Anne-Marie Quigg. A wonderful piece of work, and just continue to prosper and spread this incredible opportunity for people to grow. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been great. Thank you.
All right. Bye then.